I have a full family, my mom, dad, and little sister. In just a week, I'll be turning 18. My parents have already started asking me how I'd like to celebrate my birthday, and I told them I want to spend it at our cottage in the woods, inviting all our relatives. For some reason, my father especially liked this idea. His eyes lit up, and he hugged me tightly. "You'll remember this birthday for the rest of your life," he said with an excitement that made my heart race in anticipation. The days leading up to my birthday passed in a blur of preparations. My mother was busy planning the food, my little sister kept pestering me about whether I wanted a handmade gift from her, and my dad paid me more attention than usual. He complimented me often, noticing small things he never used to comment on before. "You're growing up so fast," he said one evening as we sat in the living room, surrounded by wrapping paper and decorations. "It feels like just yesterday you were my little girl." I laughed, rolling my eyes playfully. "I'm still your daughter, Dad." His gaze lingered on me for a moment, unreadable, before he ruffled my hair and changed the subject. Even my mother noticed his unusual warmth. "You're spoiling her too much," she teased him one morning. "If you keep this up, she'll never want to move out." But Dad just smiled. "Let me have this," he murmured, as if my upcoming birthday was a moment he wanted to hold on to forever. Finally, the day arrived. The morning sun streamed through my window, casting a golden hue over my bed. As I stretched and sat up, the smell of pancakes and fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. My family had woken up early to prepare breakfast, and when I stepped into the dining room, I was greeted with an enthusiastic chorus of happy birthday. Dad was the first to hug me, pulling me into his arms in a way that felt different. It was tighter, longer, and when he finally pulled away, his hands rested on my shoulders as he studied my face. 18, he said with a wistful smile. "How do you feel?" "Same as yesterday," I joked, reaching for a slice of toast. But throughout breakfast, I felt his eyes on me. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, just aware. As if today meant something to him beyond just another birthday. We spent the morning loading up the car with food, decorations, and extra blankets for the cottage. The drive there was peaceful, with my little sister chattering about how she couldn't wait to explore the woods. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past, the excitement bubbling inside me. I loved the cottage. It had always felt like a magical escape from the rest of the world, a place where time slowed down and everything felt more alive. The moment we arrived, I breathed in the crisp forest air, stretching my arms as Dad handed me a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For the birthday girl," he said with a grin. I laughed, taking them from him. "You picked these?" "Of course," he said. "Only the best for you." We spent the afternoon setting up for the party, laying out food on the wooden picnic table outside, arranging the chairs, and hanging fairy lights from the trees. As the sun dipped lower, guests began to arrive, my aunts, uncles, cousins, all gathering with laughter and warm embraces. Yet, through all the excitement, my father remained close. Every time I looked up, he was there, watching, smiling, making sure I had everything I needed. And as the sun set, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, I had the strangest feeling that something was about to change. Something I would never forget. As the evening air grew crisp, my father clapped his hands together and stretched. "It's getting chilly," he announced to no one in particular. "I think we should make a fire. What's a birthday in the woods without a proper bonfire?" There was a chorus of agreement from our guests, but before anyone else could volunteer, my father turned to me. "Come with me, sweetheart," he said, already grabbing the flashlight. "We'll gather some firewood together." I hesitated for only a second before nodding. It wasn't unusual for us to do things together, but something about the way he asked, his tone, the way his eyes softened as he looked at me, made my stomach flutter. Maybe it was just the excitement of the evening, or maybe it was the way he had been paying extra attention to me all day. He draped his arm around my shoulders as we walked toward the forest, his touch light but firm. "It's nice, just the two of us," he murmured as we stepped onto the narrow path leading into the woods. Feels like I never get to steal you away anymore. I smiled up at him, leaning slightly into his warmth. You see me every day, Dad. Yeah, he said, squeezing my shoulder, but it's not the same. The sounds of the party faded behind us as we walked deeper into the trees. The forest was familiar. I had spent summers here running between the trunks, climbing the low branches, picking flowers for my mother. But tonight, under the dim glow of the flashlight, it felt different. More alive, yet quieter. The wind rustled through the leaves, the occasional snap of a twig beneath our feet punctuating the hush of the night. I bent down to pick up a few dry branches, bundling them in my arms, while my father did the same. He watched me for a moment before chuckling. You've grown up so much, he said, almost to himself. I still remember when I had to carry you back to the house when you got too tired playing out here. I laughed softly. And now I can carry my own firewood. He smirked, ruffling my hair like he used to when I was little. Yeah, but you'll always be my little girl. I rolled my eyes but didn't pull away. Instead, I found myself smiling, comforted by the warmth of his presence, the steady weight of his arm lingering around me whenever we stopped to collect more wood. As we moved deeper into the trees, I noticed the way he would glance at me between conversations, as if memorizing my face. He had been doing that a lot today, watching me with an unreadable expression, like he was seeing me in a new way. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I didn't mind. At one point, I tripped over an exposed root, and before I could fall, my father caught me by the waist, pulling me close. Careful, he murmured. I was pressed against him for a moment, my heart pounding from the sudden movement. His hands were firm yet gentle, steadying me with ease. Thanks, I whispered, clearing my throat as I pulled away. He exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. Guess I still need to look after you. We gathered a few more pieces of wood, stacking them into our arms until we had enough. The flashlight beam danced between the trunks as we turned back toward the cottage, the distant hum of our family's laughter growing louder as we approached. Just before we stepped out of the trees, my father paused. Wait a second, he said, setting his bundle down. I stopped beside him, curious. What is it? He turned to face me fully, the glow of the flashlight casting soft shadows across his face. I want you to know how proud I am of you. The sincerity in his voice made my breath hitch. I don't say it enough, he continued, placing a hand on my cheek in a way that made warmth spread through my chest. You're growing into an incredible young woman. And he stopped himself, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. I love you, sweetheart. My throat tightened. I love you too, Dad. His thumb brushed my cheek for the briefest second before he let his hand fall away. Come on, he said, clearing his throat. Let's get this wood back before they send a search party. I nodded, picking up my bundle again, but as we walked back toward the cottage, I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had changed. Not in a bad way, just different, closer. We walked side by side through the quiet forest, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet the only sound between us for a while. The flashlight cast a golden glow on the path ahead, but beyond that, everything was swallowed by the deep, endless dark of the woods. I felt different. The air between us had shifted, subtle but undeniable. My father had always been affectionate, but tonight, his warmth felt more present, more deliberate. Then, just as I was getting lost in my thoughts, he spoke. Call me by my name, he said, his voice soft but firm. I blinked up at him, caught off guard. What? My name, he repeated, glancing down at me. Say it. A nervous laugh bubbled in my throat. Why? He didn't answer right away, but in the dim glow of the flashlight, I could see the corners of his mouth curve into the faintest smile. Just once, he said. For me, it was such a simple request, and yet my heart pounded in my chest. I hesitated, biting my lip before finally whispering, Daniel. The name felt strange on my tongue, intimate in a way I hadn't expected. His footsteps slowed, and before I could react, he turned toward me. The flashlight wavered in his hand, casting shifting shadows between us as he reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Then, before I could think, before I could question it, he kissed me. It was gentle at first, hesitant, like he was testing the waters. His lips barely brushed against mine, a whisper of a touch that sent a shiver down my spine. But then something shifted. The flashlight tumbled to the ground, plunging us into near darkness as his hands found my waist, pulling me closer. I melted into him, my fingers clutching at his shirt as warmth spread through me, wrapping around us like a cocoon against the cool night air. It was dizzying, overwhelming. When we finally pulled away, I was breathless, my skin tingling where he had touched me. For a long moment, we just stood there, our breathing shallow in the hush of the forest. I started, but I had no idea what to say. His thumb brushed against my jaw, his touch lingering. "We should get back," he murmured, though he didn't move right away. Finally, he bent down to grab the flashlight, the beam flickering as he dusted off the dirt. Neither of us spoke as we walked the rest of the way back, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt heavier, charged with something unspoken, something that neither of us dared to put into words. When we emerged from the trees, the golden glow of the cottage lights felt almost too bright, too harsh after the stillness of the forest. Laughter and conversation drifted toward us from the backyard, where the rest of our family was gathered around the long wooden table. Dad, Daniel, cleared his throat, rolling his shoulders like he was shaking something off. Then he glanced at me, offering a small, knowing smile before heading toward the grill. "I think I'll make some more steaks," he announced, his voice carrying easily over the gathering. "Who's still hungry?" A few of our relatives raised their hands, cheering in agreement. I lingered near the edge of the patio, my heart still racing as I watched him work. He moved with ease, flipping the steaks like it was second nature, the firelight flickering across his face. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my mother watching him. She wasn't smiling. Her brow was slightly furrowed, her lips pressed together in a way that made my stomach tighten. For a brief moment, her gaze flickered to me, and in that instant, I had the terrible feeling that she knew, or at least that she suspected something. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away, pretending like everything was normal, like I hadn't just kissed my own father in the darkness of the woods. The evening carried on in a warm, golden haze. After the steaks were grilled to perfection, everyone gathered around the long wooden table on the patio, enjoying the food and the company. The scent of sizzling meat and firewood filled the crisp night air, blending with the laughter and conversation that drifted across the clearing. I sat close to my father, though I wasn't sure if it was intentional or if he had made the choice for me. Every now and then, his arm would brush against mine as he reached for a plate or refilled his drink, and each time, I felt my heart quicken. But I kept my face composed, smiling and laughing along with everyone else, pretending as if nothing had changed. As if I hadn't just stood in the middle of the dark forest with him, my pulse racing, my breath stolen by the moment we had shared. At some point, my uncle pulled out his guitar, strumming a soft, familiar tune. A few voices joined in, and soon, we were all singing together, the melody weaving between us like an invisible thread, tying us to one another. I stole a glance at my father. He wasn't singing, just watching, his gaze shifting between me and the firelight. When he caught me looking, he gave me a small smile, one that felt just a little different than usual. I looked away quickly, afraid that if I held his gaze for too long, someone might notice. After a while, the singing gave way to a game, one of those word games we always played at family gatherings, where everyone took turns coming up with answers to impossible questions. It was silly and chaotic, with my little sister giggling so hard she almost fell off her chair, and my aunt playfully accusing my uncle of cheating. For a moment, it felt like any other night, like nothing was different. But it was, because every time my father spoke, every time his voice carried over the group, I felt hyper-aware of him, and I could still feel the ghost of his touch on my skin. As the night wore on, people started getting tired. My mother yawned, stretching her arms above her head before declaring that it was time to start cleaning up. My sister whined in protest, but even she was rubbing her eyes, fighting off the inevitable pull of sleep. Everyone pitched in, gathering plates and cups, folding up chairs, tossing leftover food into containers. My father and I ended up at the sink together, rinsing off the last few dishes. "Did you have a good birthday?" he asked, his voice quiet just for me. I nodded. "Yeah, it was perfect. I meant it." He didn't say anything else, just nodded and handed me another dish to dry. But I could feel something unspoken in the air between us, something that lingered even as we finished up and went our separate ways for the night. Upstairs, I changed into my pajamas, my limbs heavy with exhaustion but my mind still racing. The house had settled into a peaceful stillness, the only sounds the distant hum of crickets outside and the occasional creak of the wooden floors as someone moved through the halls. I had just climbed into bed when I heard my door creak open. My breath caught. In the dim light, I saw the familiar silhouette of my father standing in the doorway. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Don't tell anyone about the forest." The words sent a shiver down my spine, not out of fear, but because of the weight they carried. "A secret. Just ours." I swallowed hard and nodded. "I won't." His lips pressed into a faint smile. He stepped closer, leaning down to wrap his arms around me in a firm, steady embrace. His warmth surrounded me, his scent, with smoke and something distinctly his, familiar and comforting. "Sweet dreams," he murmured against my hair. Then, before I could say anything, before I could even process the moment, he pulled away and slipped out of the room, closing the door behind him. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. Sleep would not come easily tonight, because I knew deep in my bones that this birthday would indeed be one I would never forget.